The heavy, agonizing silence inside the grand historical cathedral was far louder than any wedding march could ever be. I stood entirely alone at the altar, my fingers clutching the cascading white orchids of my bridal bouquet so tightly that my knuckles turned bone white. My pristine, premium white silk bridal gown felt like a suffocating shroud as the whispers of 300 high society guests began to ripple through the pews. Just 5 minutes ago, my billionaire fiancé, Julian, had stood right here, looked me dead in the eyes with cold, calculated cruelty, and muttered words that shattered my world. "I can't do this, Clara. You were a great asset to my lifestyle, but I found someone who actually matches my social standing." He turned his back on me, walked down the ivory-carpeted aisle, and left me standing at the altar of my own wedding. Julian didn't just walk out, he orchestrated a masterpiece of public execution. As he reached the heavy oak double doors of the cathedral, a glamorous, younger high society heiress named Vivian stepped out from the shadows, wrapping her arm around his waist. Julian turned back toward the altar one last time, throwing his gold wedding band onto the marble floor with a resounding clink. He looked at the cameras, flashing a smug, arrogant smirk that completely confirmed his absolute disregard for my dignity. He believed that by jilting me in front of the city's most elite corporate families, he would leave me utterly broken, socially ruined, and begging for mercy. The pity from the crowd was suffocating, but as I looked down at the discarded ring, the overwhelming grief in my chest completely vanished, instantly replaced by a brilliant, freezing sense of absolute focus. Julian truly believed that because his family owned the historic Vance estate, a multi-million-dollar sprawling architectural landmark overlooking the valley, he held all the power. He thought I was just a common working-class architect he could discard like trash. But Julian had one fatal flaw. His blind, narcissistic arrogance made him incredibly sloppy with contracts. He had no idea that the legal papers he signed weeks ago to secure my architectural services had entirely sealed his financial fate. To understand how a jilted bride could dismantle a billionaire's empire, you have to go back 3 years. My name is Clara. For 30 months, I wasn't just Julian's fiancé. I was the primary architectural director and legal guarantor for his entire real estate portfolio. When Julian's development firm was on the absolute brink of bankruptcy due to predatory offshore loans, it was my signature, my clean corporate credit lines, and my unique sustainable designs that saved his family legacy from total liquidation. I sacrificed my own independent firm to rebuild his name from the ground up, trusting his empty promises of a shared future. 6 weeks before our scheduled wedding, Julian's family needed to secure a massive $20 million development bond to finish the remodeling of the Grand Vance estate. Because his personal credit was completely ruined by his lavish lifestyle, the commercial banks refused to release the funds without a strict, ironclad corporate merger. My legal advisor had warned me, "Do not tie your assets to him without protection, Clara." Together, we drafted a unique, comprehensive prenuptial project agreement. If the marriage failed to launch due to a breach of contract by either party, the entire estate used as collateral would automatically transfer into the sole ownership of the non-breaching party as liquidated damages. Julian had signed that contract without even reading the fine print, entirely convinced that I would never have the courage to enforce it. He was so busy whining and dining his new heiress girlfriend in secret that he didn't even notice the corporate restructuring notices being quietly filed with the municipal court. He genuinely believed that the prenuptial paperwork was just a standard, meaningless document designed to appease the bank underwriters. His blind greed had walked him straight into a flawless legal cage. Back in the cathedral, I slowly unpinned the bridal bouquet from my wrists and handed it to my stunned maid of honor. I turned around, held my head high, and walked down the long, ivory-carpeted aisle completely alone. I didn't look down. I didn't hide my face from the flashing cameras of the high society lifestyle bloggers who had rushed to document my public downfall. I walked out of those cathedral doors into the bright afternoon sun, knowing that by tomorrow morning, the headlines wouldn't be about my broken heart. They would be about Julian's total ruin. The very next morning, while Julian was busy celebrating his freedom at a high-end luxury resort with his new girlfriend, my legal team was already at the municipal clerk's office. By exactly 8 o'clock a.m., the official breach of contract affidavit was stamped, filed, and processed through the state Supreme Court system. The ironclad liquidated damages clause had automatically activated the moment Julian publicly defaulted on the marriage agreement at the altar. The wheels of justice were turning with an unbending, beautiful speed. 48 hours after the wedding disaster, Julian drove his luxury sports car up the winding driveway of the grand Vance estate, completely oblivious to the legal storm that had already landed on his property. As he stepped onto the massive stone front porch, he found 2 uniformed county sheriffs and a private security team waiting for him. Sitting right on the mahogany front door was a formal, red-stamped judicial eviction notice barring him from setting foot on the property. Before Julian could even yell at the officers, the sound of my black luxury SUV echoing up the gravel driveway silenced his panic. The door opened, and I stepped out onto the stone courtyard. I was no longer wearing the fragile white silk of the abandoned bride. I was dressed in an immaculate, tailor-made dark business outfit, holding a sleek leather briefcase that contained the absolute reality of his new financial status. "What the hell is the meaning of this, Clara?" Julian shrieked, his face turning an angry shade of crimson as he marched down the porch steps toward me. "Have you completely lost your mind? This is my family's legacy. You can't just show up here with the police and play games because I dumped you at the altar. Get your garbage security team off my land before I have you ruined." His high society girlfriend stood behind him, clutching her designer handbag, glaring at me with pure contempt. I slowly opened my leather briefcase, pulled out the certified copy of the project merger contract, and stepped forward. My voice was entirely clear, calm, and ringing with an absolute authority that instantly cut through his manic shouting. "Read Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the development bond agreement you signed 6 weeks ago, Julian. You didn't just dump a fiancé at the altar. You legally executed a total default of your entire corporate estate." Julian snatched the paper from my hands, his arrogant smirk instantly freezing as his eyes scanned the legal lines of ink and the gold notary seal at the bottom of the page. His expensive corporate lawyer had rushed to the scene, grabbing the document from his hands. The lawyer scanned the text for less than 10 seconds before his face went entirely pale, looking up at Julian with an expression of absolute horror. "Julian, it's ironclad," the lawyer whispered, his voice shaking. "By failing to execute the marriage, the absolute ownership of the entire Vance estate has automatically transferred to Clara." "No! This is impossible! That document is a scam!" Julian screamed, his voice dropping into a high-pitched, pathetic gasp as he tried to push past the security team to get into the house. But the county sheriffs instantly stepped forward, locking their arms around his shoulders and forcing him back down the gravel driveway. "Sir, this is a legally binding judicial order," the lead sheriff announced coldly. "If you do not leave the premises immediately, you will be placed under arrest for criminal trespassing on Miss Miller's property." The sound of Julian's sports car speeding away in defeat left a beautiful, profound silence over the entire valley. I turned around, pushed open the massive mahogany double doors of the Vance estate, and stepped inside the grand entry hall. The luxury furniture, the expensive artwork, and the beautiful architectural lines that I had spent years designing were no longer a prison where I worked for a narcissist. They were now the absolute monument of my own independent success. But reclaiming the house was only the first step of my revenge plan. Over the next week, I brought in an elite team of independent forensic accountants and corporate auditors to review every single ledger tied to the Vance estate development funds. I knew Julian was reckless, but what we discovered hidden deep inside the encrypted digital servers went far beyond simple vanity spending. He had been systematically embezzling funds from the bank bond to fund his offshore gambling accounts. Julian had used a network of fake shell companies registered in foreign tax havens to camouflage the missing millions, foolishly believing that his high society background made him completely invisible to federal investigators. But he forgot that as the primary architect, my digital signature was required to approve every single construction invoice. He had forged my name on 3 separate offshore transfers, fully intending to frame me as the fall girl if the Federal Fraud Division ever launched an investigation. Instead of confronting Julian directly, I quietly compiled the forensic financial files, the forged signatures, and the physical transaction logs into a comprehensive legal package. I didn't send them to his corporate lawyers or his high society family members who would try to buy their way out of trouble. Instead, I drove directly to the federal building and handed the entire unfalsifiable package over to the senior investigator of the Financial Crimes Division. The trap was set, and Julian was walking straight into it. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, Julian tried to launch a massive public relations campaign to save his crumbling social standing. He used his remaining cash to host a high-society charity gala at an elite downtown luxury hotel, arriving with his new heiress girlfriend on his arm, flashing fake smiles for the lifestyle press. He thought he could outrun the scandal by simply pretending I never existed. He had no idea that I had purchased the primary sponsorship rights to the entire event. Right in the middle of his opening toast, the heavy double doors of the grand ballroom were pushed open. I stepped into the room, instantly pulling every single camera lens and whispering guests toward me. I wasn't there as a victim. I arrived as the absolute owner of the event. I was wearing a jaw-dropping, elegant designer dress, looking entirely regal, confident, and completely dominant as I walked straight toward his VIP table. Julian's face went instantly pale when he saw me, but he quickly tried to mask his panic with his usual arrogant bravado. He stood up from his table, holding his champagne glass high, sneering across the floorboards. "Clara, I see you managed to drag yourself out of your depression to attend my event. Let me guess, you're here to beg me for a piece of the estate back? Security, remove this uninvited outsider immediately." The security guard stepped forward, but I didn't even move an inch. Instead, the hotel's general manager rushed to my side, stepping directly in front of the guards. "Mr. Vance, drop your hands immediately," the manager announced over the House speaker. "Ms. Clara Miller is the absolute majority owner of this hospitality group, and she has personally funded this entire charity gala. You are the one who is currently uninvited. Security, step back." The ballroom went completely dead cold. Before Julian could even process the humiliation, the heavy sound of standard footsteps echoing through the ballroom entrance, signaling the final blow. 4 plainclothes federal investigators from the Financial Crimes Division stepped into the light, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. They bypassed the entire high society crowd and walked straight up to Julian's table, pulling an official red-stamped federal warrant from their jackets. "Julian Vance," the lead investigator announced clearly, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You are under felony arrest under federal indictments for multi-million-dollar bank fraud, identity theft, and systemic corporate forgery against your former architectural director, Clara Miller. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately." Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure weeping terror as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists right in front of his entire elite social circle. As the officers began to drag a shouting, pathetic Julian across the polished ballroom floor, his high society heiress girlfriend Vivian didn't shed a single tear. She instantly took a step back, dropped her champagne glass, and slipped into the crowd, completely abandoning him to save her own family name from the brewing federal scandal. The narcissist who thought he could buy the world was left entirely alone in the dark. The fallout from his public arrest moved with an unbending, beautiful speed. With Julian locked inside a federal holding cell, pending a $10 million cash bail that his bankrupted family couldn't afford, his entire development firm collapsed into immediate liquidation. Because my independent agency held the primary project merger liens, the state court officially awarded me full executive control over his entire real estate portfolio, converting his broken family name into my independent empire. My first official act as the sole managing director of the new firm was to completely halt Julian's gaudy, overexpensive luxury remodeling of the historic Vance estate. I brought back the original sustainable architectural drafts that my dad and I had spent years designing. We tore down the fake modern partitions he had built out of vanity, restoring the historic integrity of the Valley landmark. I transformed the massive, ostentatious master suite of the mansion into a beautiful, sunlit, independent architectural studio. No longer a shadow designer working to fund a narcissist's lifestyle, I filled the space with local talent, brilliant young engineers, and green energy models that would actually serve the community. The house was finally breathing with authentic creativity and genuine purpose. 3 months later, right before his formal sentencing hearing at the federal court, I received a frantic request from Julian's defense attorneys, begging me to meet with him one last time. I drove down to the state correctional facility, not out of malice or anger, but to look at the man who had left me at the altar, and to show him exactly what his choices had built: Julian slowly lifted the prison phone, his hands visibly shaking as he pressed it against his ear. His expensive high society hair was completely cut short, his face was gaunt, and the arrogant smirk was replaced by a hollow, weeping brokenness. "Clara, please, you have to drop the forgery affidavits," he sobbed into the receiver. "They're going to sentence me to 12 years in maximum security. I lost the estate. I lost the firm. I lost everything. I was stupid. I should have never walked out on you, Angie." I slowly lifted my receiver, my voice entirely steady, peaceful, and devoid of any human resentment. "You didn't lose everything because you walked out on me at the altar, Julian. You lost everything because your character was built on fraud, greed, and a total disregard for the people who actually built your life. I am not your victim, and I am not your savior. The law is simply reading back the contract you wrote for yourself." I placed the phone down, stood up, and walked out of the prison doors without looking back. The news of Julian's formal 12-year federal prison sentence hit the front pages of the financial journals the very next morning. The lifestyle bloggers and high society reporters who had spent months gossiping about the jilted altar bride were forced to issue massive public corrections, praising my resilience, my independent design success, and my brilliant corporate defense strategy. My reputation was completely cleared. With the legal storms completely settled, I returned to the Grand Vance estate, now officially renamed the Miller Architectural Sanctuary. I spent my weekends walking through the beautiful blooming gardens, listening to the birds chirp over the valley trees, finally feeling a profound, deep sense of safety and pure independence that no amount of billionaire family money could ever buy. I hung my grandfather's and my father's original handwritten architectural drafting tools in a prominent display case right in the center of the grand entrance hall. They always taught me that a building is only as strong as its foundation, and that life operates on the exact same structural law. Julian thought he could build an empire on the shifting sands of fraud and vanity, but truth and integrity will always hold the ultimate roof over your head. My independent architectural firm launched a massive municipal project to build affordable green energy housing complexes for working-class families across the Valley District. At the groundbreaking ceremony, surrounded by real, honest, hard-working community members and supportive colleagues, I felt a level of profound professional satisfaction that far outweighed any high society gala Julian had ever hosted. As I look back on the agonizing moment I stood alone at that cathedral altar, I realized that Julian's cruel abandonment wasn't the tragedy of my life. It was the ultimate liberation. He thought he was locking me out of his luxury lifestyle, but he was actually unlocking the prison doors to my own independent power. Sometimes, the universe has to strip away a toxic relationship to make room for the empire you were actually born to build. Our modern high society world is often filled with greedy, narcissistic individuals like Julian. People who believe that their family wealth, their luxury sports cars, or their digital manipulations give them the right to treat others like property, humiliate the innocent at the altar, and erase the hard work of a lifetime. They believe that true power lies in the corporate networks they can intimidate and the lies they can spin behind closed doors. But this intense, multi-million-dollar legal battlefield taught me the ultimate moral lesson of human character. A career, an estate, and an enduring legacy cannot be sustained by empty vanity and systemic deception. True success, unshakable dignity, and genuine authority aren't found in the titles you try to buy. They are built on the unyielding foundation of honesty, character, hard work, and deep, dedicated self-respect. Julian tried to publicly execute my character on the happiest day of my future, but in his blind arrogance, he forgot that a woman who keeps her receipts, maintains her physical logs, and stands firmly on her own talent can never be broken by a fraudster's claim. When you stand completely in your own truth, the elaborate castles of the deceptive will always crumble into absolute dust under the heavy, beautiful weight of justice. If you believe that honesty, hard work, independent resilience, and true poetic justice will always triumph over toxic narcissism and revenge, please hit that like button, drop your powerful thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more deep, cinematic stories of emotional victory. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let an old cage or a broken promise stop you from keeping the entire estate your character deserved.